Good morning and welcome to We Edu Chats. Rise and shine, Ramadan Kareem to all of our watchers, viewers and followers. Today we are joined with Linda Parsons and Victoria James, and we will be speaking to Fiona Cottam.
Good morning all, and we're really excited to have our monthly We Edu talk. Yes, so we're going to be talking today about culture and retention in international schools. In term 3, there's a lot of very excited new teachers, new expatriate teachers that are going to be coming in. And obviously there's going to be like a very different outlook to schools and to your work-life balance. And that's what's very attractive to a lot of new people. And there's also a lot of veteran teachers that are going to be moving on to hopefully better schools for them. So the whole idea of like each school in the international market has always got their own individual culture, just like schools in the UK. So that's why we would like to talk about or dedicate this podcast to that. Now we are now live on YouTube, so if you would like to give a shout out, and we'll reply to you of who you are and where you come from, perhaps whether you are a veteran to the UAE or the Gulf region, or whether you are a newcomer in and very excited to be joining our network. We'd love to hear from you.
So to start off today, we're going to be having a short discussion, as Linda has said, about the culture within schools and about the different roles in leadership and the changes that are going to be happening. As she mentioned as well, please do write into the chat any questions, shout out where you're from. But also, as you can see at the bottom, there's a little ticker tape going around where you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and also be part of our LinkedIn group. So this was a really interesting subject for us because we have seen as veterans ourselves to the Middle East, a range of different roles arising and changing within education sector. And it's really important for us to be able to understand some of those different reasons about why those things are changing, and also about how that's going to change the education landscape. So we'd also like to welcome Victoria James, who is one of our other co-founders of We Edu. Welcome, Vic.
Hi. The conversation today, I think, started from, so I spoke to Fiona a few weeks ago about her journey through a number of really prestigious schools in Dubai. And the way that she was talking about staff and retention within her schools was really interesting. And actually from a number of conversations of speaking to school leaders across Dubai and across the region is actually the fact that she could identify where staff were going and where these teachers had gone to in other parts of the region. She knew kind of every single person who'd left, and she knew where they'd gone to, and she knew why. And the impression that I got from these other conversations is that that's not always the case, and that potentially there is a lot of churn in teacher roles. And I think particularly this year, a lot of people have commented that there has been a huge upheaval in some very recognizable names in kind of the education space moving around and having a kind of big shuffle, some publicly, some kind of to be revealed in the next couple months, and I think that's been really interesting to watch, and also raises the question of why is there so much churn this year, and especially in these kind of digital roles as well. That's what we've seen. And in terms of culture and retention, is that a case of leadership, or is that a case of kind of just pressure, and is this the results of 2020 pushing people to a change? So I think it'd be really interesting to think about what makes someone stay at a school, and thereby what's making people leave. Why is this churn rate so high this year?
We have the kind of like the elephant in the room, which is like it was the year of COVID, so kind of that feeds into it as well. And it's not just, I mean, like, because of the nature of like UAE and international like schools, it's not just the schools, it's kind of the ecosystem around it as well. So it's like kind of the changing needs of the school as well. I mean, that you're going to be working, like the school will be working with different companies, so those people in those companies are going to be changing around and like adapting to like the leadership roles in the school. So it's like it's almost like a vicious circle. And because of that, and because of COVID times, or because of like just the kind of the recognizing of the need for things like well-being and mental health in schools, so the kind of constantly evolving kind of pastoral care as well. You do also find that there's a lot of leadership roles that may not have existed literally a couple of years ago, but then like the school suddenly realizes that they either do or they don't want that, or like, you know, the role itself like kind of changes as well.
Definitely. And I think we've also been we've been discussing the concept of the fact that some of the schools are smaller. Those job roles maybe didn't need to exist before, but actually, as we've said already, COVID has meant that we need to push into those different areas. And people have, I think, gained so many valuable skills in EdTech and in terms of developing digital strategies that actually they potentially are seeing that there are other roles available to them now that they've kind of understood and learned that they've got this passion for educational technology and this drive to be able to actually support other schools doing it in the way that they have learned. I know that I've seen an awful lot of digital roles arising now, whereas perhaps before the school didn't have a digital leader or a digital role at all. So that's a really interesting thing to be thinking about, is actually that perhaps it's just that there are more opportunities for people where they may not have necessarily seen themselves in one part of a school ecosystem before. Now actually there's a lot more opportunity for growth within those different schools as well. And on the other side of that, I think as well, perhaps even that the fact that more people have those digital skills is actually allowing us to be able to embed those different skills within one role, or in all of the roles, I should say, as opposed to just one role and one person. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, what do you think about the future of these digital roles then? I mean, do you think there will always be a need for a digital leader? I mean, some of the terms that we use to describe digital, I mean, someone once told me about the kids today, I sound like my grandma, kids today not necessarily always being able to distinguish between being online and being offline. They say, you know, what you're doing, are you online? They say no. Like, well, you're on Instagram. It's like, well, it's Instagram. You know, they don't think about being online and offline because they're always connected. And I think you could always say that about digital roles in schools now. You know, what is the future of a digital role when technically every teacher is using elements of technology in their school? I mean, even this word technology might be redundant in a few years' time because it's just such an integral part of your classroom now. So perhaps if EdTech and if digital strategy is part of everybody's role, maybe these digital roles might be I guess dissolved. You know, will these roles still exist in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? What do you think?
Absolutely, no, I totally agree. And I was talking to somebody who is actually in Wales, an educator there, and in a leadership team in a school there. Fantastic the way that they use digital technology in education, but it's actually part of the curriculum in Wales. That it is, you learn numeracy, literacy, and digital literacy. And it's not a concept of, well, we don't teach it, or IT do that, etc. It's actually, this is what we teach. And these are the three pillars of what we do. You need to be literate, you need to understand numeracy, and you need to understand digital literacy, because exactly as you've said, it is merging into one. And, you know, I've said before, like, you don't walk around with your phone out, sending an email going, oh, I'm just doing computer science. You're just doing it. It's part of your life. It's part of your day's admin. You don't kind of refer to it as a specific subject. It's just part of what we do.
The thing is, like, okay, so 12 years ago, oh gosh, was it 12 years ago? Man, I feel old now. I think it was 10 years ago.
Like our nans, is that right?
So 10 years ago, like, I started off on PGCE, and I started off in Birmingham. So it was very kind of, it was inner city Birmingham. There's an ethos of learning in inner city Birmingham, which means that, like, even at that time, like, you know, gamification of learning and using, like, you know, digital smartly in the school was really huge in the schools that I trained in, because it engaged the students. And I didn't necessarily mean, and like it didn't happen that the students, like the students didn't have devices out, but it was a way that the teachers effectively used digital. And that was kind of like starting to be ingrained into our PGCE studies even 10 years ago. And actually, if you have a look at the history of like what is EdTech and what is digital technology, like, you know, and how does that relate to the school, like, and what is digital literacy, that's been around since the 60s. I mean, like, technically, like, you know, wheeling in that TV, like, you know, when we were kids, like, that was still using technology in the classroom. But what's now happened is that the children now have this, what you said, Victoria, this merging of, like, the online and offline world, and that's true for teachers and also students. So like in the last 10 years, from what I've observed, is that you don't just talk to the teachers about digital literacy. You cannot just say to the teachers, like, you know, this is how you conduct yourself online. It needs to be, as Philippa said, completely ingrained into the school. Now, just like how you would ingrain teaching and learning into the school, like, you know, from how we have done it this year, and just speaking anecdotally about my school, like I worked very closely with my teaching and learning deputy head, because digital was seen as completely merging and in parallel with like teaching and learning. So, you know, you become a better teacher by learning these digital skills, and you become a better learner, a better student by learning these digital skills. So I think it's like what Mark Anderson, I always give him a shout out, he's amazing, was saying was basically like, you know, the change in leadership is, yes, like a lot of schools and a lot of I guess a lot of academies and stuff like see the need for innovation roles and digital strategy, because it does need to be ingrained. But ideally, it shouldn't be that one person. It should just be ingrained. Now, how you get to that stage requires leadership and requires strategy. So I guess, like, as EdTech evolves, and it is evolving very fast because of many reasons, because of COVID, but also because like that's just the nature of EdTech. We're probably going to see this specific role for digital strategy evolving quite fast. So I guess if you're watching this in 2 years' time, this might be completely redundant, and we would have to like update this. But yes,
I totally agree. I think and from my perspective, so I always kind of bark on about the safety and the side of it in terms of safeguarding. But actually, one of the things that I've managed to develop in my school is that every single part of the leadership team has a specific role within that. And so the safeguarding lead, the deputy head in charge of that, is very aware of online safety, and that is slowly being integrated into that. But it does require that thought process, and actually kind of having someone, like you say, that leadership initially, even if it is, you know, for 3, 4, 5 years, that actually somebody sits there and says, no, this is part of it. Because until people are aware of it, it's just like education, isn't it? Until we learn that it's part of it, then you don't really know. You know what you know. I don't know who quoted that, but it's a quote, right? And yeah. And so it's one of those things that you almost need that person who's really passionate and about that specific role and about what's going on, to be able to make other people aware of it. And I guess that links really, really back to professional development and understanding it. And in some ways, I guess it has taken this pandemic for people to realise the importance of digital technology and the importance of how much impact that has on everybody's lives. And it's not even just the teaching and learning side of it. It's actually that whole digital ecosystem where it's your infrastructure, it's what you have, your technology, and staff understanding what it means to download an app and just let everyone get onto it, and all of those different parts of it.
Yes, yeah, it is. I totally agree with you, Philippa. And it's just, you just made a point there where it's just like digital strategy is not just downloading the app. So it's an evolution, and like, you know, also like one of your points was you need someone who's passionate. I don't know whether this is a bit controversial, but I don't think you. It's not just the passion; it's also like the know-how, and it's kind of like the understanding of how. Oh gosh, like how do I put this into words? Like, it's not just kind of like someone being really keen and like coming up to like the front of like, you know, your school and just like with jazz hands, just like, oh, Seesaw, it's amazing kind of thing. But it's like how, like the understanding of how digital strategy links to teaching and learning. And that's what speaks to teachers, and that's also what speaks to students. Like, and I guess like that's what I take from passionate from that. But the point that you just like that just came up in my head was also the role of teaching and learning. Deputy head for teaching and learning is quite a it's a role that, like, if you went onto TES or if you went onto like any other, like, you know, international recruitment site, like you could kind of type in deputy head of teaching and learning or teaching and learning lead and it would come up. However, that role in the last 10 years I can see has completely changed as well, and I'm sure it's probably changed in like the education, like, you know, places that you've both been in as well. And that's kind of linked to like learning science. So you get like, you know, as people are evolving in like how they see teaching, the leadership roles are evolving as well. And I guess that's a major part of culture and retention, because like you need to be as a school, like have that vision of like, what does my school want to be like, and in order to attract the people that are right for your culture, that are saying the right things about like, what do you think like teaching and learning is like in this school, because like the deputy head for teaching and learning may not have the same views, so that's clearly not going to be right for you, and it's not going to be right for your school, and therefore the retention may go up or down, just literally because like the vision of the school basically needs to be clear. And that's a really big part of it.
And I think that vision and the why you're using digital technology is really important to be able to pull those together. And that's where it then goes into the rest of the ecosystem of the safeguarding and the teaching and learning. It's both, you know, pastoral and academic, and it has to be all of it. And it actually has to reach out across the community as well, because is it right for your community? And every school is different, and every school needs to approach digital technology and digital learning in a totally different way that's better for them. But I totally agree. And my final point would be that also that passion, it does need to come up with the backup of someone who actually wants to go off and do and learn all of those different things. And I think actually what you get from digital leaders is people who feel that they're not part of either camp, but they're just really passionate educators. And that's why they can see that this all links together. Now, my biggest worry is for schools now is that they go, oh, you're an IT teacher, you can do this. And I think that's quite often where it does get let down, because actually it has nothing to do with that. You know, being able to teach computer science or IT is a totally different thing to being able to teach other teachers about how to teach and how to use technology appropriately, and also what the technology is doing and why you would be using it, and constantly questioning that. And that takes a totally different type of leadership. So I'm going to hand over to Vic now. Well,
actually, I mean, it's it leads on to two things. So one, it looks like we're having some humongous technical issues backstage. So if you see some wide eyes, so it looks like Fiona can't join us. So we'll invite her back another time. But if she doesn't mind me taking the words out of her mouth, one of the things that she did do with her school was actually the digital leader at her school, and actually Linda knows him very well. It isn't an IT teacher, you know, someone with a very different background, but had that passion, had that real kind of interest in pulling all these kind of loose strings together, and that's her digital leader. And you wouldn't expect that. I don't know, Linda, you know him better than I, so I don't know if he wants to be name checked in this conversation. But you know, that way sort of Fiona saw that as an opportunity to pull someone like that into her digital role, rather than exactly like you say, pulling an IT teacher who doesn't necessarily have that same passion for this whole school approach. Like I said, not an educator. I'm on the outside looking in, so there's not a slight on IT teachers anywhere. So I'll stop talking before I put my foot in my mouth.
As a huge plug, I would say that he probably does, because he's writing an excerpt for my book exactly about not being an IT teacher delivering.
There you go. Let's shout him out then.
Yes. So Neil, if you're watching, like we're big fans. But I think like what we did, I mean, like just talking about kind of the recognizing you know, what your key players in your school, and like that's a huge part of it. Is a huge part of retention. It's a huge part of creating the culture organically in your school. And like, you know, the most passionate educators are the people that feel valued. And the most passionate educators that will be loyal to the school will also feel like they're like having a meaningful part of that school. And like it's perhaps a lot of that, I mean, even in a small way, like, so as you know, like my background, Philippa's background is digital and digital strategy, but like that's like a small leadership part of a wider school. And as you go through the leadership stream, like like the most successful leaders that I've seen are the people that recognize that potential in people, and that recognize the potential like organically within the school. Like whether you are new to the school as a leader, or whether you are a veteran like leader of that school and you have new teachers coming in, it's the same thing. It's not just like keeping going to the, you know, the stereotypical like it's computer science, so therefore they must be digital, or it's innovation, so therefore it must be like, you know, going to the design technology lead. It's actually like looking at the people as a person and getting to know those people first before making that decision, because like you'll find that the people that are the most passionate educators can be taught how to lead. So again, bringing it back to myself and bringing it back to Neil as well. I know that when we started talking last year, it was like a massive part of our discussions was like, how can we pull people in to like help us in our roles? Because I mean, like, you know, as a biology teacher, and he is a PE teacher, we don't know every single subject, and that's huge for, like, you know, any for any kind of leadership role. Like you train for years as a teacher of history or as a teacher of Spanish, or as and it doesn't necessarily mean that, like, you know, you know the nuances, you know, the context of, like, you know, another subject. But like being able to relate to that and having people like and saying to people, like, you know, come in and, like, you know, help me learn about your subject, it then gives them that passion. So you end up leading your own little team, and that then translates to kind of like bigger and bigger roles. So eventually you get to kind of director or principal of the school, and it's just like, okay, well, I'm a foundation year teacher. I'm a foundation year teacher for 21 years, but now I happen to be the principal of the school. But it's like, I'm really interested in learning about what you can bring to the school as well, and finding out about your skills. So you're like fostering this kind of like cultural growth, I guess.
Don't you think that's really empowering as well? Because all the digital leaders that I've ever met have been very much in the same aspect. Like, I'm a design technology teacher, led DT departments in the UK, came out here and become a computer science teacher, but a primary computer science teacher. So for me, it's still very messy and creative. But it's that what I've loved and when I've met digital leaders at conferences and spoken to them online and things like that is actually that passion for wanting to know. And isn't that just the most important thing about retention and culture of a school, is people caring and wanting to know why you do what you do and what drives you and your passion. And like, I hope that when I do become a principal of that school that you've just mentioned in my head, is that I remember that my buzz always comes from how excited other people get about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and the excitement that then that builds and generates with children in the classroom. And if that is what digital leaders are doing in schools, they are incredible leaders, because they're leading the whole school through change management, apart from anything, which is just the hardest thing. But also they're inspiring people to be able to engage and have a better balance within the classroom, and teaching students skills that literally make their eyes go wide. And I think that's an amazing thing to be able to do. And that really, for me, is about, in terms of culture, is about people wanting to know why you do what you do, and being interested, genuinely interested in why.
I think like that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I think what you just touched on there, like, you know, being whole school digital lead. So like for anyone who is like, you know, coming in just new to the UAE or coming in new to international school, this is actually quite a new concept. And I know that, like, you know, because traditionally, like in UK schools, you have a primary school and that's it, or you have a secondary school and that's it, or a further learning sixth form, college, you know, and they're all very much separated. But like when you come here, you know, into a school in UAE or the Gulf region. So I've worked in schools in Qatar, in Kuwait, and in Dubai, and the common thread about all of those schools is that they are K-12. And therefore a whole school digital lead then becomes like, it's a whole other dimension, because you're not just going from early years to year 6, or you're not just going from year 7 to year 11, and so on. Like, you're going literally from the very small, they've, you know, barely touched an iPad, or, you know, whatever, or they've never used it for educational purposes, and all the way up to kind of like, what is plagiarism, like, you know, making yourself safe online, and on all of that, and the digital role encompasses all of that, which is what makes it a very exciting role, a role that, like, you know, can develop really fast in international schools, but also will develop differently, because you know, as like some people have said, like, as I said previously, like some people do say, like, you know, you don't need a digital role. It's more needed, I guess, in and for retaining the common thread of learning, retaining the common thread of teaching as well throughout a huge school. It's really important to have the common thread of teaching and learning and digital and pastoral, and doing it so like it supports a student throughout the whole journey, as opposed to like having to, like, you know, you happen to have and I've seen it so many times happen, like a campus, but it's only a campus because it's geographically a campus, but it's not actually like a campus in terms of like through learning, which is really a shame, because it's like two distinct schools, and like you have so much potential, like, with the primary schools and the secondary schools being on the same place, and like, with the teachers just learning from each other. But, because of, I guess, more traditional like ways of looking at leadership, they're kept separate just because of the way you look at leadership. And I guess like the trend now is like having more whole school so that we can learn from each other, and therefore the culture of the school becomes more through. So therefore then it's going to trickle down to the parents and the students feeling more like they're in a community. Right.
Yeah, it seems like with so many different platforms, so many different choices, so many different ways of doing things digitally, is that you run the risk that if you haven't got someone who does kind of pull everyone together and pointing in the same direction, then you're just going to have so many different theories, so many different ways of learning spread around everywhere, and you'll end up with confused students from one class to the next, right? I was curious, but going back to something that Philippa said, actually, is talking about, so in a very corporate space, they talk about how people don't work for businesses, people work for people. And I wonder if you agree, if you feel the same way in schools. Do you work, does it matter what the name of the school is? If you're working for a very prestigious school or a very expensive school or something like this, how much is that kind of prestige of working for a very recognizable, very prestigious school versus working for your leader? If you they talk about people work for people, and people leave people. You leave your manager, you don't necessarily leave your school, for example. So I wonder if you felt the same way in an education space as perhaps this very corporate theory about how people work for their bosses.
Very much like how we developed digital strategy at DERA International is that we developed it for the community. And a massive thing about that is, at the start of every year, we audit like the teachers' views, the students' views, and the parents' views. And then we like in term 3, which is why like, we wanted to talk about culture and retention, like in term 3, like right now, because that's what we're doing at the moment. Like, and it is like working for that community. Yes. Okay. Like you're going to have like schools because it's the nature of a business. Like the majority of schools here are kind of like, they're kind of seen as like businesses. So there's a marketing strategy and so on, which is a little bit different to like UK schools. But you're still essentially working for people. You're working for human beings, and you're working for their needs, their educational needs, and also like, you're working to their strengths and to their weaknesses. So it always has to be put back to that. And like, let's say at the moment, we're quite good with Sentry. Okay, but we do not push ourselves as a Sentry school. We push ourselves as a school that has like, and I'm going to go back to the mission, the vision, and the state, like that statement, because I think it's so important for retention. It's been so important for like driving kind of like various strategies, pastoral teaching and learning, and digital strategies forward for our school, because it's all umbrella under like, you are part of this community. This is what we see our community as. Like, we want your help to kind of like, push this forward. This is ours. And it's, yes.
So this links in incredibly well to our guest for today, who I can only apologise to. She's had an incredible amount of digital issues, which is just totally annoying when you're presenting to two digital leaders, but exactly about culture and retention, and exactly what we're talking about. So hopefully please welcome Fiona Cottam, who can give us some insight into what she does at her school.
I hope you can actually hear me now. It's interesting. I went to the hairdressers yesterday, and there's a wonderful sign over the sink, and it says, you never know how strong a woman is. She's like a tea bag until you put her in hot water. I've certainly been in hot water this morning in relation to technology, and I think I need to somehow upgrade my Chrome links on my Mac, which I will be doing sometime next week when I talk to somebody who knows how. I do apologize. So I'm on my phone, so I apologize if it's not quite as it should be. But good morning anyway.
Good morning.
So I mean, from my perspective, I'm the principal at Hartland International School, also in Dubai, and unfortunately, I've now missed the first sort of 10-15 minutes of this incredible discussion. Just picked up on what Linda was saying at the end in terms of how different the market is in this city. How schools, put themselves out there in terms of their community, in terms of how we use marketing and how we sometimes appear to operate as businesses. But I completely concur with what she's just said at the end, which was probably the most important point, which is we're still schools. We're still about human capital. We're still about people. We're still organisations that care about the young people that we have and the staff that we have within our community. And without that type of compassion and without that type of empathy, without that type of organisational structure and operating as a community, regardless of how well we market ourselves, our businesses will fail, and thereby our schools will fail as communities. So I feel very strongly that, yes, we're in a different type of sector in this part of the world often. Yes, I think sometimes it is misconstrued, that particularly when you see debates online between for-profit and not-for-profit. Quite frankly, you know, in this market at the moment, I think even those of us who are operating in a for-profit sector are not making any profit at all because margins are so tight and the economy is so strained. But we certainly don't enter into our school businesses thinking that way. We enter into our school businesses in for-profit organisations because we want to reinvest in education often, build additional schools, build additional capacity. So it isn't, it's misconstrued, I think, about lining the pockets of the people sometimes that own the schools. It's definitely not the mantra that school owners have. They do it often for very philanthropic reasons, to give back, to make a difference, to build additional schools and to invest in different ways. So the profit is used for growth often, and certainly isn't used for, you know, negative reasons that one might anticipate or expect. Certainly since I've been in Dubai, you know, since 2009, I've always worked in the for-profit sector. I had the privilege of working with GEMS for 7 years before coming to Hartland. And certainly the reinvestment was always about school improvement, about the community, and about making schools grow, and reinvesting in people actually, and reinvesting in who we are as communities. So that sense of community, I think, is the thing that brings us together in this part of the world, regardless of whether or not we're competitors or not.
I definitely would agree with that, with the people that I speak to on Twitter and things, and even just the collaboration before COVID. That as soon as, you know, the pandemic hit, it was so clear that we were part of a bigger picture of education as opposed to anything else, you know, like you said, military or anything otherwise. It was just, we are in this together, and we're going to help each other do everything we possibly can.
So Fiona, when we spoke a few weeks ago, you talked a little bit. So I wonder if you could talk about, it was the story that really interested me, is about, I guess, your staff retention rates since you've been in your current position, and I guess over the year how you've managed to get staff to stay with you. You know, how have you? Tell us a little bit about that kind of retention story that we talked about when we spoke, and then tell us what you think has created that culture for your school.
I'm hoping I heard that question completely, because I had a really bad breakdown in terms of connectivity. Can you hear me okay?
You're a little bit fuzzy. On the phone to Etisalat this week, I think, Fiona. So hopefully, we talked a little bit about your journey with Hartland. I didn't want to put too many words in your mouth, and I was sort of started to tell a little bit about the story of your retention journey. But yeah, it would be great to hear it from you about how you've, if at all possible, to hear it from you.
Oh, I think that this is.
I might have to invite Fiona back after she's had that call with Etisalat and got her internet upgraded. Perhaps we should think about some closing statements, and let's invite Fiona back in a couple of weeks' time and have another go. So we're really sorry for anyone who was tuning in specifically for Fiona, but as you know from watching 11 million webinars throughout 2020 and 2021, this is not the first time, and it won't be the last. Yeah, let's wrap up. Philippa, any closing statements on culture and retention about? So I think before you kind of welcomed Philippa, and we talked a little bit about how people work for people, not for schools, and what that means to you.
Exactly as I was saying sort of before I jumped offline, is just, it really has to be about who is working for you, and finding out personally about who they are and why they do what they do, because there are unfortunately educators out there who do it for the international flights and allowances, etc. But equally there are so many hundreds of teachers, thousands of teachers who really have a drive and a passion to be able to educate children. And I think personally as a leader, the way that I've always managed my teams is about finding out who they are and why they do what they do, and using that to be able to inspire other people. And I think culture within schools is about caring and about wanting to make sure that people are okay. I remember I had a mentor and leader in the UK who I actually speak to, and she's actually set up her own coaching company now. But sometimes when we had our line management meetings, it was not, what have you done? How many targets have you hit? What have you, how many percentage of students are doing this, this, and this? Sometimes it was just, let's have a cup of tea. It's been a really hard week. And that is so important to sometimes just remember that the people that you're working with and for you are actually people as well. And that to me builds the right community, because if people care about you, you want to give as much as possible back to them to make sure that it succeeds. So I think that's really important.
Yes.
Linda, comments?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Philippa said, and it's the thing that really jumps out at me is we've put ourselves through, as educators, we've put ourselves through 3 years of undergraduate degree, then we found our passion. That's for the great majority of people, you find your passion through education, through through developing people, through developing human beings, and sometimes that gets lost. Especially throughout your NQT year, a lot of people get broken, and it's down to the leadership, and it's down to the leadership of your mentor, and that school culture that would then determine whether that NQT then develops into a teacher that is passionate and continues to be passionate, or ends up, rather unfortunately, because you see this in international schools and in schools in the UK, burning out. And that burnout is a very, very real thing, and that's what turns a lot of people to international teaching. And it's not so much yes, you do get those people that turn to it and they rather flippantly say oh, it's because of the sun, sea, and the sand and all of that kind of stuff. But deep down, there is that person that started their education journey because they wanted to develop people, and bringing that out as a leader is so important. And the best leaders do that, and the best leaders will end up developing that in no matter which school that they are in, no matter whether they are for profit or not for profit. And that's what Fiona, I think, was about to say with us. But perhaps we need to give Fiona a chance to hi Fiona, a chance to say this for herself, maybe next week or another time. Thank you so much for everyone who joined us today, though.
Well, Fiona might be on a computer.
Oh,
no, let's have another back.
I've moved location.
What do you think?
I think I'm on a computer. I think it works.
Fiona, we'll close it up for this week. We've lost Fiona again, so let's definitely close it up for and a couple of weeks' time, Fiona. We'd love to invite you back if that's okay.
I am here, and I think I can hear you, but there's just a significant delay, and I just can't seem to. I'm just waiting for the delay to happen, but you can't hear me.
No. You're right on the phone to do Oretta Salat next week, and we will invite you back. And I'm really sad we couldn't make it work today, but yeah, let's definitely start again. Me and Philippa and Linda had a really good work in your absence, which so really appreciate anyone who's stayed to the end to listen to us air our thoughts on culture and retention. Thank you everybody for watching, and thank you for anyone watching later in the day. And we'll see you all very soon. Ramadan Kareem.